As Taj said a few weeks ago, when we were over Twitter, over social media, working out who's going to talk about what in this fora, and we sort of came up with a plan. And then last night we were out for dinner, and I said, Taj, what is it you're going to talk about? So the extent of our planning got to about conversation last night. Fortunately, as Taj said, I'm going to really concentrate on his last slide, because as you've probably recognised from the issues that Taj was talking about, many of the problems that we have in Australia and New Zealand in emergency medicine are very similar to the things that Taj has pointed out in the UK. Particularly the fact that our complexity is going up, our aged care presentations are going up, our resources, particularly in community, are dropping off, and most of you would have seen, or hopefully some of you would have seen, the issues, tackling that issue around mental health patients in emergency departments, and that's due to a significant lack of investment in community resourcing, but also due to a significant lack of investment in inpatient beds. So much of the problems that we see in the Australia-New Zealand context are very, very similar to what we see in the UK. So I didn't necessarily want to go through and repeat all of that. So interesting just to reflect on the journey that Taj had to get here over the last, bouncing around to Sydney and Melbourne. I actually just caught the bus with my kids. They go to school just up the road, and it was very embarrassing for them this morning to see their dad getting on the same bus as them. They made sure that I sat up the back of the bus all by myself, so I wouldn't embarrass them in front of all their friends. So we're talking about the 5 successful strategies to provide a safe ED in Australia. This is the thing I really want to talk about, is culture. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we can have the best strategies that we want in our emergency departments and in our hospital systems, but unless we have the right culture, then trying to implement these strategies becomes very, very difficult. I have made this a very royal sort of, in recognising that Taj was going to be here. I didn't actually ask his views on the royal family, so just in case I've got this one as well. So has anybody heard this quote before? Because I've used this quote many, many times. And in fact, I was over in Adelaide earlier in the week talking to the meeting with the South Australian Health Minister and talking about the issues they have in transforming health. And as some of you would know, the Transforming Health program in South Australia was a big investment in lots of organisational sort of restructure and patient flow and resources. And the Health Minister said, the issue that the biggest barrier was changing culture. And we spoke about this, and I said, you have to realise that you have to get the culture right before you can implement your strategies. And I said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And he said, oh, can I use that? And he quickly jotted it down. I said, it's not my quote, it came from a fellow called Peter Drucker, who back in the early part of last century was an Austrian-born philosopher, moved to the States and was very much involved in when the introduction, I suppose, of the mechanisation of the workforce and the production lines that were introduced in industries across the States. And he was very much an advocate for people and saying that the best investment or the best resource you have in your organisation is your people. And he was very much an advocate for investing in people in their education, giving them the capability, the capacity to come up with new ideas and implement new ideas. And the job of the managers, the people who provide the resources and manage the system, was to allow their people to get educated, to improve their skills, and to be able to implement their ideas. And I'm sure that many of you who work in our public hospital systems today recognise a different form of management, which is one that is really invested in numbers and performance indicators and budgets. So I really want to talk about that, focus on that. So if we want to recognise what a safe ED is, what we're talking about, we need to actually define what a safe ED should look like. And many of you would recognise these sorts of pictures with patients lined up on trolleys in hallways. And certainly this isn't safe for patients, but it's also not safe for staff as well, because working in this environment is incredibly stressful. This is Another picture that some of you may recognise, this was actually in a hospital near you last winter when we had a bed access crisis and patients lined up in hallways. And again, certainly not a safe environment. Not a safe environment for, again, patients, not a safe environment for staff. And in fact, not a safe environment for the community that they're looking after, because a lot of the ambulance resources are tied up in the hallways of that hospital. This is a much better looking emergency department. Now, surprisingly, I wouldn't be surprised if none of you have actually seen an emergency department that looks like this, in fact. But you can see it's clean, it has resources, it has space, people aren't under pressure and stress. In fact, this emergency department hadn't opened, so therefore you will probably not see many emergency departments that look like this in the Australian and New Zealand environment. This is what a safe ED looks like. You know, you've got staff who are engaged, staff who are a team, staff who are working together and want to come to work because they enjoy each other's company, they enjoy working together. As opposed to this. So these staff have obviously just got a very sick patient there on the trauma trolley and they're rushing off to CT. And they've opened up the doors and they've seen a manager with a clipboard and they've just realised that accreditation is due next week. And they can't remember if they've done their mandatory training. They can't remember if they put debug on before they put their gloves on. And certainly the lady on the right there is quite concerned because the cardie isn't part of the hospital uniform. And so despite the best interest of the patient, they avoid making eye contact, they slowly back away and close the doors and try and find an alternative way to get the patient to the CT. So certainly not a safe environment. And this, of course, is not a safe emergency department. You know, this is a clinician, a nurse, we don't know, who is obviously not working in an environment that is particularly psychologically safe. So what does a safe ED mean? Well, it's got to be safe for patients. Obviously, it has to be clinically safe, but it has to be physically safe, mentally safe, and obviously culturally safe as well, because we do know that patients of different backgrounds, different cultures. We've recently looked at some work, some data around our Indigenous presentations across Australia. And our Indigenous patients have a very high level of leaving emergency departments or not being seen because culturally safe in that environment, that directly impacts their care. So it's not a safe environment for them. And as I said, it has to be safe for staff, it has to be physically safe, mentally safe, and culturally safe as well for staff. So strategy number one for me for a safe ED is the culture. So in order to have a safe ED, there needs to be a culture of safety from the top of the organisation down. This requires strong leadership, shared responsibility from your CEO and your board, down through the emergency department and all the way through to the guy who comes in, the PSAs who clean the beds, your volunteers, nursing staff, physio staff. Everybody needs to have a common goal, and that common goal needs to be providing a safe work environment. There needs to be a level of accountability and respect, and of course no silos between the emergency department and inpatient teams. This is a quote from Michael West. I don't know, Taj, if you know Michael West. This is from the King's Fund. The strongest predictor of patient mortality rates is the percentage of staff working in well-structured teams that have clear objectives, that meet regularly to review their performance and how it could be improved, and whose members work closely together. So a cohesive team with common goals is probably one of the most important aspects of patient safety. So in order to have that sort of culture of safety, it's really important that we invest in staff. And this goes back to what Peter Drucker says, we need to invest in people. So we need leadership that provides support. And as I said, that's not just your emergency department directors and your emergency department executive, it's from the CEO and the board down, but we also need leaders within the emergency department, because as you know, running EDs is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week business, and that requires leadership across multiple levels within your emergency department. But success needs support, and to ensure that you'll have that leadership and you can provide that environment of, as I said, safety and excellence, we need access to regular debriefing, we need structured feedback, you need access to emergency psychological support and mental health supports. We need to ensure that feedback, whether it's good or bad, becomes part of your, well, all feedback is good, sorry I shouldn't have said that, but becomes part of your workplace culture. Staff need to be recognised and rewarded, and they need to be allowed to innovate and implement their ideas. And most importantly, down the bottom there, the recognition of discrimination, bullying and sexual harassment. And as you all know, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept, and we shouldn't accept that sort of behaviour. This is from a trainee up on the Sunshine Coast, and I think it speaks for itself. For junior doctors, it's feeling like being a valued team member. My department does this really well. It brings out the best work in everyone, safer staff and safer patients. Resources is really important. We've already seen from Taj that obviously we are in an environment where often demand is outstripping supply. But we're talking about investing your people resource, and I think these are some of the roles that a safe emergency department will have in place. They'll have quality and audit leads, which will be a team of clinicians, nursing staff, your nurse practitioners involved in regular quality and audit procedures in your department. We're looking at having a risk mitigation role in our emergency department, so somebody proactively recognises where there is risk in the department and acts on it before that risk evolves or eventuates and leads to an adverse patient outcome. Morbidity and mortality is incredibly important. I'm sure a lot of emergency departments, a lot of departments do have that, but as you work further out of the major departments who do have the resources, simple things that you would take for granted, like more regular morbidity and mortality meetings, do drop off the radar because the resources just aren't there. So of course, the clinicians are heavily invested in just the delivery of clinical service, but the things that will improve the delivery of clinical service tend to get pushed to the side. You need mental health and wellbeing champions, and we can see that is growing, and obviously mentoring. And as I said down the bottom there, the most important resource we're going to have is time. So time enough to balance clinical assessment, flow management and teaching, embedded processes enabling all who have an opinion, focus on shared goals, passionate celebration of team and achievement. Breaking down the silos is incredibly important. I know it's a cliche, but just as emergency medicine in your department is a team game, healthcare is a team game, and we can't have a safe emergency department without investment from inpatient teams as well, without investment from other stakeholders, including our ambulance services and our general practitioners. So we need to invite them into the tribe and share your culture, because we can't tick all the boxes without investment and buy-in from inpatient teams as well. And this is from Tim, who's a GP over on Kangaroo Island. And listening is probably the most important thing. In a really busy environment that we work in, we don't take time enough to listen. So the most important thing I think you can do is listen to your patients. And they will tell you that you need to engage in cultural safety initiatives. You need to celebrate diversity. You need to talk about the things we don't talk about. Biases, unconscious biases around race, gender, religion, and other marginalised groups. And this is from a patient a father of a patient I saw last week. So there's much more, and we can address some of these other issues in the Q&A session, but obviously, investing in IT systems and communication systems, investing in evidence-based care, choosing wisely, evolve, investing in security, that's the safe physical environment, infrastructure, training, better patient access and flow, but they're all a given because we know all about those. We know that we need to invest in those things. There's one last cliche. As a champion team will always beat a team of champions. So I think in emergency medicine, more than most other disciplines, is that it's all about the team. It's not the sort of discipline where you can have people who are in it for themselves. They have to be in it for the team. And I was recently reminded, using a football analogy, I know there's a few Tiger supporters around here, that it was interesting to see the success of their football team was based on the fact that many of their champions, their best players, have been signed up with a reduce in their pay because they want to invest in the team and make sure they maintain that positive team culture. So I think in emergency medicine this is an incredibly important mantra. I think it's time for questions.